Hi class, these are the additional lectures that go beyond the modules. And this talks about technology strategy. And what it does is integrate together everything that you've learned in this class. Now for you online students, okay, what are we looking at? Well, Module 12 has to do, the added lectures have to do with a little about how the web works and also CRM and this lecture. Next week, to add on, talking about modeling and all, a little something about optimization. Then the next is about digital transformation, and that's how did companies change, and close the gap on the digital divide. And finally, talking about general technologies that drive our age today, what the implication is and what they mean. Also, during that week, you'll have your quiz. So what does strategic management of technology mean? You can look at it one of two ways, and I brought this up in one of the other lectures, but it's about managing technology in your organization, which implies that you're in a tech business, or can I bring in technology that I can implement that makes a change to my organization? And so today we're going to focus more on managing the technology and what it means. So what's the core of what we do with technology? And what it all comes down to is your technology and strategy is focused on three things: creating value, capturing value, and delivering value. And so, well, for those of you who are literary types and know the book by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but there are companies that have lasted 100 years. Think about that, 100 years. What did they do to be able to survive for that long? Well, when you look at the great companies that can last over 100 years, one of the key components of them being able to do it is that they were true to themselves, meaning they had a bias and they stuck to it. It's just like Steve Jobs when he came back to Apple. Steve Jobs' choice was, well, we could make changes and try to bring in cash and like trying to sell our operating system or something like that, or try to capture market share in the computer market or something like that. And Steve Jobs said, look, if we're going to fail, we're going to fail being Apple. Apple has always been about innovation. Apple's never been about market share. It's about pushing frontiers. And so he said, we're either going to fail or succeed that way. And guess who was right? But when we look at GE, how has GE done it? Well, they've done it through diversity, meaning they sell everything from jet engines all the way down to metal equipment. And that's what they've always been. They've been the diverse technology company. Coca-Cola. The strength of Coca-Cola is they understand customer preference. Yes, the centerpiece is Coke, but if you notice, they've also acquired other beverages. Or at first, people like drinking Coke from the soda fountain, and then they found out people would like it to be portable, so what they do? Bottle it. And they also look at domestic and foreign markets. What types of things can they enter into? Also being superior marketers. Smuckers, the jelly people have been around 120 years. And what they've always been about is, what does the brand of Smuckers say to you? Decency, purity. And that's the values that they've always instilled in their people. And also the value of independence. And that's that they want their people to tell them, what do you think is going on? And so subsequently, like now, it's about organic. And I think I saw organic Smuckers the other day. Target has always been about being the contemporary store. And so what they've done is they've expanded their departments one at a time. And they've done this over 115 years, where now you've got groceries in Target. But you feel the difference between Target and Walmart. Walmart, you look at their website, it just looks cluttered. It looks like they're trying to cram as much stuff in every square centimeter they possibly can. Whereas Target, it's more about image and being hip and everything else. Target, you find barcode readers in there so you can check price. You don't find that in Walmart. And so they want you to think they're on the leading edge. JCPenney, well, in 5 years there may not be any more JCPenney's. But they are, they have been around for a long time, and their strategy has always been go where the customer goes. And so after Sears came out with a catalog, they came out with a catalog. They had regular freestanding stores, and they found out everybody was going to the malls, and that's why in a lot of malls you see JCPenney's. They go where the customer goes, and then they realize now customers want a unique experience, so that's why they've been setting up stores within their stores. UPS, they've always been about supply chain. Neiman Marcus, in the downturn, when people didn't have money in 2009, what was the choice? Was Neiman Marcus going to go discount because people didn't have money? No. They did have to close some stores, but they've always been about luxury. And to get away from that, they wouldn't be Neiman Marcus anymore. So they stuck to their guns. Boeing has always been about diversity, innovation, and supply chain. Nikon has got some interesting challenges. The one thing about Nikon and cameras, and why they're one of the few standing camera companies left, is they've always been able to come up with new products very quickly. They've always been about innovation and speed. The problem they have right now is your cell phone cameras are pretty damn good. So what are they going to do? My guess is they'll probably just focus on commercial photography. They don't want the people who take pictures by cell phones. They want people who do this for a professional living. So what it comes down to is how much a role does tech play? And what it comes down to is technology is a tool. And so the question is, how do I implement this tool? But when you look at these companies, most of them are not technology based, but they have technology in them. They do use it. They know they have to do it to be contemporary. But what it comes down to is the reason why tech is such a hard business is, first of all, there's ambiguity, meaning typically there's no one clear path. There's more than one path. Like when the first .com businesses came out, everybody just thought, oh, it's all just about a new channel. And what we found out is the internet is far more than that. It's complex, lots of different issues, because it's not just the technology, it's also the business, the customer, and everything else. And not only that, but like with the internet, what is it you're going to do with that reach? It's unpredictable. MySpace dominated social media. Whoever thought Facebook would come along? And also the velocity of technology. It changes very quickly. Sun Microsystems was one of the big three computing companies, up there with HP and IBM. 5 years later, they're gone. They got eaten up. Their value dove down, makes them attractive for somebody to gobble them up. And now I think Oracle has gotten rid of them altogether. You get turned into mulch, and then you get spread across the field. The other aspect of velocity is the Digital Equipment Corporation was the second biggest computer company in the world. Within 5 years, gone, eaten by Compaq. To describe what goes on, it's based on the S-curve, and that's that you create a base, or you ferment, you start building up. Then you hit that vertical part, the growth stage, where you hit the knee and everything just takes off on you. And eventually you will mature. And the S-curve pretty much describes how products act, how markets act, and everything else. Now in the fermentation stage, you have to do experimentation. You have to have cycles of learning. And you tend to have a lot of them in small amounts. In the growth stage, you have far fewer cycles, but they're bigger cycles. You're doing bigger things of much higher scale. And then in the maturity stage, naturally, you go back to doing more small things. Because you're in the downturn, you're typically offloading things onto other people. In terms of market behavior in the early going, you could actually have more competitors instead of less. The thing is, those competitors don't stand out. In the solar business at one time, there were 80 companies going at it. At one time, in this country, there were 300 car companies. Then once you start taking off, now you're focusing on marketing and competing. And so those complement supply chains and everything else. And then towards the end, there are very few players because there's just not enough value for you to all divide up. Now what happens in technology is, yes, when we're in the production phase and growing, we add capacity. But how do we get out of being trapped in the maturity phase? It's innovation. So now you create a whole new S-curve, and you can have multiple S-curves. And this is what happens to the companies that last 100 years. They make changes, they adapt, and they keep growing. And the granddaddy of them all is Nokia. Yes, that Finnish company. Nokia's story and what they've always believed in is we want to be the key infrastructure company for Finland. So they started out in timber because in the 1800s, what did people need? People needed timber. Wood was the primary material of the world. And what happened next is cars started coming out. And so they said, oh, well, maybe we need to get into rubber. So they got into rubber. What is rubber also used for? Power systems were being created. Rubber was insulation for cabling. So they got into the cable business. What is another big part of cabling? Yes, telephones. So they got into the telephone business. And they got a project from the government in wireless. Wireless, telephone, cell phone. That's how Nokia got into cell phones. This is a company that started out in timber and migrated into cell phones. And what happened in cell phones? The smartphones came out. And then they started getting pounded by Samsung and Apple. And at that point, the big thing about Nokia is they've always made the change before they hit the full maturation stage. What they do is typically jump off when they're starting to cusp. And so what they realized is we need to get into a business different than cell phones. We're not a hip company. The one thing that's not going to change is data. It's just going to keep growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's when they sold off, and today they're a data infrastructure company. Their key strengths have been is they've never waved from their original mission. The other thing is some companies pivot too quickly. Your old business still has merit. You never pivot at the exact best time. You know, it's kind of like getting rid of a quarterback. You either do it a day early or a day late. Guys like Bill Walsh like to do it a day early. Evidently, Bill Belichick did it a day early with Bernie Kosar, but he's not doing it with Tom Brady. But you have to keep your cash cow. Your customers change during the S-curve. The first ones are understanding, and then you hit something in technology that's unique, that's talked about in another lecture, and that's the chasm. And that's that between your growth, that early majority, there's a big difference. And your new sets of customers are much more demanding, they're price sensitive, and it's because you're getting into the mainstream. And then towards the end, you just have you're firm believers. Like there's still people out there who'll buy vinyl LPs. So the implications of all this is that your planning is limited due to uncertainty. And that's what happened in the dot-com boom. A lot of companies came out, but a lot of companies didn't quite know what to do. Reacting is not enough. In the 1980s, IBM was close to going out of business. And what had happened is here you had this behemoth IBM. But coming out of Silicon Valley is you had 1,000 companies that were going after each and every little part of IBM, whether it was printers or PCs or middleware or whatever. And so IBM said that there was no big competitor killing them. It was these 1,000 little competitors. And so what do big companies do? Let's break it up. Let's have focus groups. Sound familiar, HP? But then Lou Gerstner came in, and here's a guy who came out of, I think he came out of RJR Nabisco, the crackers man. But what he said, wait a minute, we're not going to break this company up. And he said, the strength of IBM and the core of IBM has always been, is that we can provide solutions nobody else can because we have the scale and the size. And so we're going to pivot into the services business instead of just being about hardware. And subsequently IBM took off. Now IBM is at another Rubicon, and that's in this age of data. How do they continue to survive against all these little companies? Your focus moves from internal to external, even Apple. How the heck is Apple going to build 200 iPhones? Well, this is where you need diversity with your people. Do you think Steve Jobs could have pulled off figuring out how to do 200 million iPhones? No, the thing is, if you're the vision man and you're not interested in this execution stuff, you hire a good guy to do that. And that's your COO. And who is the COO of Apple who made all this happen? Tim Cook. But then again, Tim Cook made a really bad decision to launch iWatch 1. He's made up for that with iWatch 2. Oh, excuse me. And the thing is, your traditional techniques often fail when you get away from your core. Meaning people think, oh, when somebody does something, let's just react to it. Let's play defense. But when you get away from your core, when you forget about what it is that makes you unique and different, that's when you get into trouble. And so, in talking about the core, in the next video, we'll start talking about creating value.